Brother Barry gave me my first break. He produced my first records. Go away, plane.
March 10th, 1988 marked a quiet rupture in popular music. Andy Gibb was 30 years old when his heart failed, an ending that arrived not with a final concert or a deliberate farewell, but with an abrupt stillness that felt unfinished. He was too young to be sealed into legend and too famous for his death to pass unnoticed. The voice that had once carried the emotional temperature of an era fell silent without ceremony, leaving behind an absence that felt heavier precisely because it lacked drama. Andy Gibb did not burn out in a single collapse. His body simply gave up after years of moving faster than it could recover, after seasons of pressure, exhaustion, and internal fracture hidden behind a smile that America had come to trust. Less than a decade earlier, Andy had been the radiant dream of late 1970s pop. Youthful, handsome, and emotionally open in a way that felt sincere rather than rehearsed, he seemed to appear everywhere at once. Radio, television, magazine covers, live stages. His presence was constant. At 19, he achieved something no solo artist before him had managed: 3 consecutive debut singles reaching #1 on the Billboard charts. Success came with such speed that there was no pause in which to absorb it. Before Andy could understand who he was becoming, the world had already decided what he represented. Behind the effortless image, however, opposing forces were grinding against each other. Andy was a gifted musician searching for an identity of his own, yet he lived permanently in the gravitational pull of the Gibb name. He longed to be loved as a person, but he was consumed as a product. He was praised for being perfect at the very moment he was losing the internal footing needed to sustain that perfection. The erosion was slow, quiet, and largely invisible, but it stripped him of something essential long before his body finally failed. Andy Ernest Gibb was born on March 5, 1958, into a family where music was not a dream but a daily reality. By the time he took his first breath, his older brothers, Barry, Robin, and Maurice, were already on a professional trajectory. Studios, tour schedules, and industry conversations shaped the family rhythm. Andy's earliest memories were not of ordinary childhood routines, but of backstage corridors, late-night rehearsals, and cars pulling away before dawn. Music surrounded him so completely that it preceded the formation of personal boundaries. As the Bee Gees rose to international fame, Andy grew up in an environment that blended privilege with displacement. Material comfort arrived early, but so did isolation. At school, he was different, marked by a surname that carried weight before he had done anything to earn it. Admiration from peers often came paired with distance. While other children were learning who they were among equals, Andy was already aware that expectations hovered around him like a permanent shadow. Barry Gibb, in particular, occupied a central place in Andy's inner world. He was not an imposing mentor, but a constant presence, offering encouragement, handing Andy his first guitar, listening to early songs without judgment. To Andy, Barry represented both safety and an idealized image of artistic success. That closeness nurtured Andy's confidence, but it also established a silent benchmark. Barry's achievements were not a challenge to surpass, they were a standard that seemed unreachable and unavoidable at the same time. Andy left school early and gravitated fully toward music. Writing songs, performing in small venues, and standing on stage, even awkwardly, gave him a sense of individuality he struggled to find elsewhere. In 1974, Andy formed Melody Fair, a modest band that performed on the Isle of Man. The shows were small, sparsely attended, and unglamorous, but they mattered. For the first time, Andy stood before audiences without borrowing the authority of his brother's fame. He took the work seriously, insisted on discipline, and avoided drugs and alcohol, as though he sensed that something inside him required protection. Australia became the next step, chosen less as a gamble and more as a proving ground. Unlike the Bee Gees' early years there, defined by financial pressure and survival, Andy's experience was buffered by family support and existing media interest. Studio sessions and television appearances followed, and songs like Words and Music earned polite recognition. He neither failed nor truly struggled, and that middle ground shaped him profoundly. Andy moved forward without being cornered by desperation, but he was also never forced to discover who he would become if the safety net disappeared. By the mid-1970s, Barry's guidance transitioned into active involvement. Andy entered the studio in 1977 with material crafted for success, and the results were immediate. I Just Want to Be Your Everything climbed to #1 on the Billboard chart in July of that year, before Andy had turned 20. Love Is Thicker Than Water followed, then Shadow Dancing. 3 #1 singles in succession transformed Andy from promising younger brother into a phenomenon in his own right. Television amplified the image. Andy became a fixture on American screens, approachable, warm, and emotionally transparent. Teen magazines framed him as the perfect romantic ideal, yet the pace was relentless. Recording sessions were efficient and formula-driven, designed to replicate success rather than explore possibility. Andy sang with precision and discipline, but he often lingered alone after sessions, replaying his own voice as if checking that it still belonged to him. To counter the strain, Andy searched for stillness elsewhere. He began taking flight lessons, drawn to the discipline and silence of the cockpit. There, nothing had to impress. Procedures mattered more than applause. For brief moments, he existed without performance. He also returned to songwriting quietly, sending demos to his brothers not as career moves but as personal check-ins. Family life entered during this period with both promise and complexity. Andy married Kim Reeder young, and for a time, domestic routines offered grounding. The birth of his daughter, Peta, introduced a new dimension of responsibility and presence, yet family life demanded a slower, deeper engagement than Andy had ever been taught to sustain. When the marriage ended, it did so quietly, leaving behind a realization Andy could not escape. Some roles cannot be completed on schedule. By the mid-1980s, plans for a controlled return were forming. Island Records expressed interest. Conversations with his brothers turned toward collaboration rather than rescue, but Andy's body was no longer aligned with intention. The exhaustion he had outrun for years had accumulated. Breaks no longer restored balance. His heart, strained by years of pressure and substance use adopted to maintain pace, began to fail. Andy Gibb died on March 10, 1988, from myocarditis following years of physical stress. There was no final performance, no deliberate goodbye. His voice remained frozen in time, forever young, forever open. What lingers is not scandal or controversy, but a quieter sadness, the sense of a life interrupted before it could slow enough to mature. Andy exists now more than a footnote to the Bee Gees or a symbol of disco's rise and fall. He stands as a reminder of the cost of success that arrives before identity has time to form. Not every voice is granted the chance to age alongside the person who carries it. Some stop too soon, not because talent fades, but because the weight becomes too heavy to hold. Andy Gibb remains one of the clearest, most heartbreaking examples of that truth.